What's up guys, welcome back to another video. Of course, my name is Gareth and Pod Cameras, as it always is, every week. And today, we're talking about portrait composition tips because it's Tutorial Tuesday. Welcome back to Tutorial Tuesday, where each and every Tuesday, we bring you a brand new, fresh photography tutorial. And this week, of course, is no different. We're gonna be talking about portrait composition tips. We had a video a couple of weeks ago talking all about portrait tips in general, some general tips to improve your portraits. This time, it's all about the specific composition tips that you can use when taking portraits to kind of improve your portrait photography. So let's just dive straight into it. Tip number one, rule of thirds. Super easy, super straightforward, but makes a huge difference once you start implementing it into your portraits. This means positioning your subject on one of the lines on the grid that makes up the rule of thirds. If you can pop an eye on one of those intersections, that's gonna work really, really well. This just kind of improves the overall feel of the photo. It can kind of take things a little bit further than just positioning them centrally. Now, of course, there's absolutely nothing wrong with positioning your subject centrally. I do it all the time, especially if you're trying to get symmetry on either side or you're trying to fill the frame like we talked about a couple of weeks ago. That could be a big thing. But if you're not going completely fill the frame, actually using the rule of thirds can be a big thing. And actually, you can also implement this if you've got your subject side on, maybe you have their head on one of the intersections, and then they kind of naturally move through the frame down to the lower intersection. Anything like that can work really, really well. Now, this kind of really naturally leads on to tip number two, which is to leave the space in the photo in the direction that your subject is facing or looking. Obviously, this doesn't apply if your subject is facing directly onto the camera, but if they've got any body language, a little bit like this, for example, even if they're looking, you might want to have a little bit of space towards the front of their body. And the reason for this, it just feels way more natural when you're actually looking at the photo. It feels more open, it doesn't feel claustrophobic, it feels good. You can, of course, do the opposite to create a more claustrophobic feel. So if you've got your subject kind of looking over their shoulder like that, and you have more space on the other side, it's gonna feel way more claustrophobic, which is a feeling you might wanna go for. But generally speaking, you wanna leave a bit of extra space, you wanna position your subject so that the front of their body is facing into the photo where you've got more space. It's just gonna feel more natural and kind of feel good for the actual photo. Now, tip number three is all about where you kind of crop your photo. Of course, full body portraits are great, fantastic, but we're not always going for that. And there has to be a decision to be made about where you are cutting off your photo, where you're cropping it, both in camera and then of course in post as well. Now, generally speaking, you don't want to crop your photos, cut them off on the joints of your subject. So the knees, the elbows, the ankles, it just doesn't look good. It looks strange to us. And I think because subconsciously we know there's a joint there, so it almost feels like we are literally cutting away at the joints, which is kind of weird. So actually cutting above the knees can look much better for that kind of portrait, or cutting kind of above the stomach, so sort of chest upwards or shoulders upwards, but not cutting, at the wrist, at the ankle, at the knees, because it just feels off. And that then means the whole portrait feels off. And it also looks like, it's not been so thought out. It's just been kind of snapped. It doesn't necessarily feel like that much of a big thing at the time, but the overall feel of the photo will be massively affected by this. Now, a similar thing here with tip number four, which is to avoid having lines intersecting with your subject's head. Now, this generally means things like the horizon just going through the head, or things like a tree or a plant coming out, in the background, so it looks like they're coming out of the back of the head, or anything like that. You want to avoid that. And the main reason is simply that it is just quite distracting, or it just can be something that makes the photo feel a bit off, a little bit like with the joints. It's not always super noticeable that that's what it is, but more often than not, it does cause a bit of a problem for the actual end result of the photo. Usually it's just as simple as slightly adjusting your positioning. So you either move the camera up or down, or just change the angle slightly to avoid the horizon going through the head. So you can move the horizon above or below, you know, down to sort of the chest or something like that, or just moving slightly round to one side or the other, just to remove whatever it is that's behind your subject that then looks like it's coming out of their head or anything like that. It tends to be the head that this really is the problem with. So just make sure you're looking out for that. It's something that, you know, you'll pick up on over time, but it's an important one to try and make note of and try and deal with at the time. And then tip number 5 is to add a foreground element to the portrait. So shoot past something or through something. Obviously leaves, trees, that kind of stuff works really well, but shooting even just past, you know, some sort of post that just happens to be there, a lamp post, a fence post, anything like that, shooting kind of through grass, long grass, anything like that can add a huge amount to the photo. It can naturally frame your subject. We talked about subframing in the past in previous videos, but this is a huge way to improve your portrait and actually, like I say, naturally frame your subject, draw the viewer through this frame to your subject, and add this interesting foreground element to your photo, which then creates layers where you've got the foreground, probably slightly blurred out element. You've got your kind of subject as the midground, which is the subject of the photo, of course. And then you've got the background as well, again, probably a little bit blurred out. So you've then got 3 layers to your photo rather than just subject background. And that's a big deal. That really adds a lot to the photo and can really improve the overall kind of composition and then feel of the end result photo. So those are our 5 composition tips for portrait photography. Of course, there's loads more. If you want to see more portrait tips, absolutely let me know in the comments. You let me know last time, hence why I'm making this video. So I'd love to hear what you want to see in future tutorials as well. If you have any of your own tips, pop them down there as well. And of course, as always, there's a full list of all the kit, the cameras, the lenses, all that kind of stuff that was used for all these photos down in the description, so you can check that out as well. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe. That helps us out enormously. I will of course see you in the next video, and as always, thanks for watching.